Elvis Presley will go down in history as one of the greatest artists of all time. Not only for his role as one of the main influences of the rock and roll invasion in the 60s, but also for raising the bar when it comes to how popular a musician can be. Usually, this level of acclaim would mean that no matter where you look in his discography, you'll find nothing but gold. But in the 60s, a vast majority of the work Elvis did was as an actor. Music fell to the back seat, and as a result, we have some of his most questionable releases. But maybe this confused moment in his career was a good thing, because without it, we wouldn't have that wonderful TV special that now is known as one of the greatest comebacks in the history of music, the '68 Comeback Special. I am extremely excited for today's video, not only because Elvis is one of my favorite artists of all time, but also because the '68 Comeback Special for me is one of the most important and amazing moments in the history of music. Because it wasn't only the return of Elvis to live performances, which is already pretty massive, but this was a before and after for him as an artist too, you know. He went from Hollywood star to rock and roll star once again, and that transition, you can see it happening live, and it's beautiful. When you listen to as much music as I do, you start to notice that when a discography is long enough, the albums and the singles tell you a story of evolution, a story of a lot of different influences and ups and downs. And Elvis probably has one of the most obvious examples because when you look at his discography, you can see change happening in real time from album to album. I don't really want to do like a full timeline of his discography because we're here to talk about the '68 Comeback Special, but for you to understand how important this whole project was for Elvis, I do have to take you back to the beginning. In 1956, Elvis released not one but two self-titled albums, Elvis Presley and Elvis, and these two albums are often ranked among the most important pieces of music ever released. The reason is quite simple. Elvis basically popularized an entire genre with these two albums, and even though rock and roll music was already a thing prior to Elvis, thanks to people like Little Richard and Chuck Berry, it's more than obvious that Elvis was the one who put the genre on the map. Elvis continued to release very successful albums like the Christmas album, for example, which is actually one of the best-selling albums of all time, a gospel album in the form of His Hand in Mine, and you have Elvis Is Back, which is actually one of his most critically acclaimed albums ever, released in 1960. But according to a certain guy whose name I don't even want to say, Elvis had reached the maximum level of popularity that the music industry had to offer, so he needed to move on to something different, acting. And this guy is probably the greatest villain in Elvis Presley's story, you know. This is someone that completely destroyed his integrity as an artist. I'm pretty sure you know who I'm talking about, but in case there's any doubts, of course I'm talking about the Colonel Tom Parker. This fucking guy, man, if you explore the story of Elvis, you're gonna find multiple instances in which Elvis was offered a really good opportunity, either for a live performance, a music project, a TV show, or maybe an album, you know, an idea, a concept for an album, and because of this guy, it didn't happen.
And the very next day, Colonel Tom Parker realized that everybody in America is talking about Elvis Presley, so he is no longer going to appear for free on TV.
One of the most notable examples would be his duet with Frank Sinatra in The Frank Sinatra Show. Frank wanted to do a welcoming party for Elvis once he was back from the army, and the amount of money that this guy asked for was so ridiculous that even Frank Sinatra wasn't sure if he was going to be able to pay it.
We work in the same way, only in different areas.
In every single deal he ever closed as Elvis's manager, everything was about the money. And I know that a lot of you people will say, well, that's the whole point of having a manager, you know, he's supposed to get you a good deal. And I agree with you, but it's not really the case when it's sacrificing your artistic integrity. And that's exactly what happened, by the way, because his Hollywood phase is probably one of the saddest and most depressing moments of Elvis's life. And not only because he wasn't satisfied with the music, that's definitely a factor, but also he wasn't satisfied with the roles. I watched every single movie that Elvis participated in around this time, and let me tell you, they're some of the most generic, mediocre, and syrupy movies I've ever watched, you know, and they're filled with this comedy bits that are so predictable, it's borderline annoying.
I think maybe it's a little too well done.
If you're a fan of Elvis, I'm pretty sure you'll get a giggle out of these movies. You're going to have a fun time, but overall, the script, the production, and the acting is not good. They're not good movies, and Elvis was aware of this, and he wasn't happy. Plus, the music, man. In some of these albums, you can find some of his most popular tunes, like Can't Help Falling in Love, Pocket Full of Rainbows, and The Lady Loves Me, but for the most part, they're really generic, pop-oriented tunes that don't really align with Elvis and his personality, and most importantly, his musical tendencies. He did not want to perform many of these songs, but thanks to the Parker formula, how that idiot liked to call it, the albums promote the films and the films promote the album. And it worked, you got to give the guy his flowers. It did make Elvis a bunch of money, but Elvis wasn't satisfied. That's not the music he wanted to do. He needed a change, basically. He needed to go back to what made him happy, and that's exactly what he did with the comeback special in 1968. Because I know that a lot of you are probably going to say that I'm putting too much of the blame on the Colonel, and that's not the case at all. The main reason why so many of the movies from the 60s failed was because the Colonel was asking for too much money, so the production needed to reduce the cost, and that made the movies obviously of lesser quality. Elvis wanted to participate in more serious movies with more dramatic roles, but the Colonel just wouldn't allow it, which is one of the main reasons why he was so unhappy with his acting career. So no, I'm not putting too much of the blame on that douchebag, okay? He was the main reason why many of the projects Elvis involved himself with after the 50s failed. Now, believe it or not, the Colonel was really close to ruining this one for Elvis as well, because he wanted this whole thing to be a Christmas special. Obviously, Elvis wasn't happy with the idea. I mean, singing Christmas jingles on TV when he was originally a rock and roll star, his artistic tendencies, his influences, his roots did not align with whatever the fuck Parker wanted him to do for money. So we gotta give our thanks to Bob Finkel, because he's the one who had the idea of making this whole thing about Elvis and Elvis alone. Actually, he was the one who convinced the Colonel of changing the concept of the TV show, and he accepted, just as long as they had a soundtrack album for the whole thing and a Christmas single, I think. And that's how the comeback special came to be. I know that it was a really long intro, and I'm sorry about that, but I needed to explain everything that had happened before for you to understand how important this whole performance was for Elvis. The TV show was about 52 minutes long, if I remember correctly, but the actual recording for the whole thing took more than 4 hours, so you have a really long show spread throughout 4 different performances. I think you can find the whole thing on YouTube. If you can, I'm going to link it down below so you guys can see it for yourselves, because in my opinion, this is the very best Elvis Presley live performance ever.
Man. Good night.
His vocals, personality, charisma, energy, style, in my opinion, this is the best Elvis ever looked, with his pompadour, black leather jacket, wristbands. Everything looked so cool, man. I know that a lot of people prefer his Las Vegas outfit. I know that it's more American, and it's more iconic in a way, but for me, the black leather suit aged a lot better. It's so cool. Every time I watch this performance, man, this man looks so good. Most of the times when I see someone playing live, I don't really care about what they're wearing, but when it comes to Elvis, he looked so cool that it instantly makes the performance a lot better. Now, I gotta say, the sit-down version of this show is a lot better than the stand-up. You can feel the chemistry that he has with his band. You can see how he's building his confidence little by little. At first, he's incredibly shy, almost awkward. How he doesn't know what to say. He's trying to introduce the band, but doesn't know how to do so. He cracks a few jokes, but no one laughs. It's actually kind of really hard to get through.
This is a song that, it's a new song, and it goes into the special. I hope you like it. It goes something like this. How'd you like it so far?
In a way, it's kind of wholesome, he hasn't performed live in quite a few years, so obviously he feels a little out of place in this scenario. Obviously, the set is amazing. We're talking about Elvis Presley here, one of the greatest discographies of all time, so you have incredible songs like That's All Right, Heartbreak Hotel, Love Me, Blue Suede Shoes, his best performance of Are You Lonesome Tonight, Blue Christmas, Trying to Get to You, and Memories, incredible song after incredible song, and his performance is incredibly interesting as well. Mainly because when you go to the original recordings of a lot of these songs, you find that they're way more melodic and high-pitched. Instead, Elvis seems to take a more blues-like approach to the performance in this one, and I think it sounds amazing, and it shows his vocal maturity. The chemistry he has with the rest of the band allow for these little moments of improvisation that feel very genuine and organic. And even though I'm pretty sure that you'll probably find a lot of these songs being performed in a more arranged and accomplished fashion in many of his Las Vegas concerts, I think that the bare bones feeling of this album is what makes it so special. Seeing Elvis so relaxed, and having so much fun is almost magical.
Steve, you want to do the other thing? Trouble again? Well, I don't. I'll see you tomorrow.
And if you're into a more energetic performance, you have the stand-up version of the show, which is pretty much the same. He just doesn't have a band and he's dancing all around, doing the hip movement and all that good jazz. It's really good as well. It's a really good performance, but for me, the intimacy of the sit-down, it's a lot better. There's definitely a few negative things I could say about this performance, especially when it comes to the production. The way that Elvis's vocals blend with the rest of the band is horrible. The foot tapping, is so echoey that kind of drowns the whole track in this weird percussion thing. The rhythm guitar sometimes is ridiculously loud, and at times Elvis doesn't really control his distance from the microphone, and his voice sounds way too far back in the mix. It's definitely a problem. In the TV special, it's not really that big of a deal because they just go for the best performance, but if you want to watch the full show, you're definitely going to find some times where the production is really, really bad. But something that's almost as important is the aftermath of the show, because Elvis was so satisfied that he called his manager to tell him that he wanted to go back to touring and he was done with acting. The great reception the show had also led Elvis to record what in my opinion is his best album by far, and one of the greatest albums of all time from Elvis in Memphis, where he features a lot of his influences in the form of country, blues, rock music, and folk. I'll Hold You in My Heart, It Keeps Right On Hurting, In the Ghetto, and if you go to more recent versions of the album, you can also find songs like Kentucky Rain or Suspicious Minds, one of his most recognizable songs, So yeah, this album screams America to you. I love the timeless energy of this album, and honestly, believe me when I tell you, man, this is one of his best albums. Now, I know that for a lot of you, his time in Las Vegas wasn't all that positive, not when it comes to music, because he gave us some of his best performances, but in his personal life, drug addiction, health issues, marital problems, depression, and, eventually his death. And because all of that started with the 68 comeback special, with him going back to touring, it feels like a lot of people seem to believe that this wasn't such a good moment for Elvis, but for me, this was the one and only victory he ever had over the Colonel. And I know that that's going to sound weird. Why is that such a big deal? Elvis had the potential of being the greatest artist of all time. He comes really close to being that as it is anyway. He's definitely one of the greatest, but he could have been the greatest if not for that greedy, money-thirsty bastard, and I feel like this was the one and only time where he was doing exactly what he wanted to do without the influence of the Colonel, without him ruining everything, without him asking for too much money, without him treating Elvis as a doll that was only supposed to be in the cover of a movie, an album, or a magazine to make money, and I feel like that's so special, and it represents the peak of his career, in terms of style, in terms of vocal performance, in my opinion, even though a lot of people think that belongs to his Las Vegas performances. For me, a lot of his best performances are in the 68 comeback special, and in terms of integrity as an artist, I think this was Elvis at its peak, and for that reason, I feel like the 68 comeback special is not only one of the most important moments in Elvis's career, it's one of the most important moments in the history of music, because the main problem with the music industry is how money-greedy companies continuously sacrifice artistic integrity to make the decision that's going to make them the most money, and that has probably ruined a lot of discographies and a lot of great albums. So for me, this whole show is not only a comeback by Elvis, it's not only an incredible performance, but also an artist rebelling against a manager that only wants him for money. And this whole rebellion reaches its climax at the very end of the show, where instead of performing a traditional Christmas song like the Colonel wanted Elvis to do, he performs one of the most powerful and hopeful songs ever written, If I Can Dream.
How many ahs do you want? Okay.
That is going to be it for today's video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. If you want me to talk about any other topics related to music, if you want me to check out a song, an album, or an artist, leave it down below and I'll make sure to read it and fulfill your request as soon as I can. Once again, I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.